Hello, my name is Andy Agathangelo. I'm the founder of the Certified Social Enterprise Transparency Task Force. It's a community of people that started around 10 years ago. We have people involved in our community from 20 countries around the world, but we are very UK centric. Approximately 80% or so of the 5,000 people who get our weekly communications are in the UK. But to be frank with you, the issues we encounter in the UK market really are replicated right around the world, and I'll perhaps come back to that point a little bit later on. We've run many events about the insights people have been able to share through books. With one exception, we've only ever run one event about a book. The exception is Crashbank Wallop, the book by Paul Moore, rest in peace. This is the third event we've run that is linked to Paul and his work. And that in and of itself, I think, speaks to the importance of what Paul managed to do in his life and the relevance of Paul Moore and his work ever since his life. Tonight's event is not so much about the book itself. It's more about the call to action that his book steers us towards. I'm going to read out some sections from the book because, to my mind, what I'm about to read out fits so perfectly and so well with what our community is all about. It really could have been written by many people within the Transparency Task Force. The point I'm making is that Paul Moore's worldview, his values, his insights and experiences really do align beautifully with what has become my life's mission over the last 10 years, and frankly, the life mission of many people here, and the literally hundreds and thousands of people who are a part of this movement who aren't here. There's a part in Paul's book where he talks about a particular individual, and I'm going to read out a couple of paragraphs. Paul writes, "Change is always possible, even when the odds appear to be stacked against it. The English politician William Wilberforce, 1759 to 1833, took on the entire establishment with his campaign for the abolition of the slave trade. Success was achieved by bringing home to the general population the horrors of slavery and the trade itself. This was done in various ways, but probably the most potent was by publishing two key books, one by a freed slave called Equiano, which sold 20,000 copies in 1 month alone, and the other by John Newton, the ex-slave ship master who became an Anglican clergyman and who wrote the famous hymn, Amazing Grace. Amazing Grace. And at the end of the book, at page 555, there's a section that Paul entitled, A Movement is Born, the New Wilberforce Movement, Integrity in Action. And when I read this, and when I reread this in preparation for tonight's event, I felt it was something of a gift to me and everybody in our community, perhaps even more than a gift, perhaps a blessing, because what these few pages from page 555 on onwards go to do is to give us all a very clear direction of travel around what the community we have together is all about, needs to go to. I'm going to read some of it out now, and I'll be reading some of it out later. And Paul Moore, if you're listening, thank you. Thank you for giving us the direction that you provide. Paul Moore wrote, with a clear sense of direction, we have built a powerful initial plan, and we would like everyone to be involved in developing it further. William Wilberforce was one of the world's greatest politicians and social and moral activists. He worked tirelessly for the abolition of the physical slave trade. He also set up the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, as well as other causes at the heart of social justice. In the confident hope of receiving William Wilberforce's inspiration and action-focused approach to leading major change, a team of us are about to unveil a big idea. And we want you all to be part of it. We will soon be launching the new Wilberforce movement, which will become a mass peaceful movement of individuals and organizations that seek to free us all from the slavery of greed and the damage it does to others, ourselves, and the planet. We will achieve this by seeking to restore values and ethics in society and by living by the core watchwords of love, truth, justice, and freedom. The new Wilberforce movement strategy will focus on communicate, connect, and campaign. It will be highly action focused and will shortly launch its first campaigns in which you and everyone you know can get involved. It will only work with your involvement. I'll probably return to that section later, but let me talk to you from my heart to yours, ladies and gentlemen. I can honestly promise you that in the last few weeks, I've had conversations with key people, including Robert Delner, including Steve Conley, who you'll be hearing from tonight, where we have kind of landed exactly at that place. The idea of a movement looking to restore values and ethics in financial services and beyond. And I find it almost spooky that we can go back to a book written 10 plus years ago to find the direction of travel for the next part of our journey from a book written by Mr. Paul Moore, rest in peace. I find that to be a gift. It encourages me to feel that we are moving in the right direction and that our intentions are absolutely aligned with what needs to happen. In some ways, I can look back on the hundreds, no, thousands of conversations I've had over the last 10 years of doing what we do, and the hundreds of meetings we've run, like this one, and in-person meetings, and kind of say to myself, everything we have done thus far has brought us to where we are here and now. The sense of purpose is truly, truly off the scale. And quite literally, we would not be where we are right now had it not been for the work and the insights and the suffering that Paul Moore had to endure to put him in a position to share the wisdom that is and the truths that he has since been able to share. Later on this evening, you're going to be hearing ideas from Steve and Robert about the concept of fellowship and how we want to turn fellowship into, if you like, an activist movement for change. Peaceful, collaborative, consensus-based, about truth and about healing and about justice and about reform and about all those things that matter a great deal to us. Before I pass over to Robert Delner to pick up from here, and for Robert to then speak with Maureen, I would like us all just to take a moment to reflect on the possibilities of the future. Things don't have to be the way they have been. Things that are broken can be fixed. Things that have been hurt and damaged can be healed. Failure cannot and will not live with persistence. And without any doubt, the sense of calling, I don't mean that in a spiritual, religious way, but the sense of calling that we all seem to have and that we all seem to share seems to be very real and very important and very purposeful. And returning to a theme I touched on earlier, let's go where the energy takes us, wherever that may be, wherever that will be, it will be the right place for us to go to. Thank you all very much for being here. Can I please invite our good friend, Robert Delner, to pick up from here? Robert, over to you. Thank you very much, Robert, and thank you all.
Thank you, Andy, for that introduction. And if I can just sort of set the scene a little bit and give some context with regards to the book and with regards to Paul. Paul and I, we met, it's probably about 2009, 2010, during the financial crisis. We both became acutely aware that the financial industry was in need of some form of reform, for a better word, certainly change. And we quickly, I would say, came together in thought and action, trying to help and work with organizations to find navigate the very complex area around both regulation and systems reform. I just want to sort of take the opportunity then as Andy has done, and without Paul we wouldn't be here. And Paul has kind of shown a light, both with his book, but of course more importantly with his actions and his enormous courage to step up and step out of his role as head of regulatory risk and compliance at HBOS at the time, but then to basically take on the organization and take on the system as such, in search for truth and justice and what is right in this world. And if I can just sort of briefly talk a little bit about the book. I think for anyone who's read the book and understand where Paul was coming from, he was also a big fan of quotations. And I know one of his favorite ones was, "You can't defeat Goliath with your mouth shut," which he got from after hearing Joyce Meyer speaking in a car once upon a time, and he used that quite frequently, and I think derived some real strength from it. And also, to not do what you can to protect someone, that's cowardly. That's Jody Lynn Anderson. And Paul, who passed now 5 years ago, I would say epitomizes the courage it takes to become a whistleblower. I'm sure Maureen will give some more insight to how that actually happened, because it is you have to cross the Rubicon, and it could be a very significant Rubicon at some point for that even to happen. But Paul, as we know, he had an incredible amount of faith, a devout Catholic, and he ran his life with courage and integrity. But also from a background as a lawyer, was a barrister. He had the capacity to speak truth to power. He was also a very, very diligent person with a forensic attention to detail, highly positive, optimistic, and hopeful, and a real authentic, a lot of authenticity to life's journey and the challenges that we all have. Because Paul also fought his own demons and fought to overcome them in an open way. And he was also a member of another fellowship, which maybe Maureen will talk a little bit about later on. But he clearly was a man of huge courage, integrity. And I think the word courage is important in this context, because it's when courage is crushed in the process of having been a whistleblower and then getting basically into a quagmire with organizations and legal processes. Paul had the I wouldn't call it the fortune of being a lawyer, but he had the capacity as a lawyer to navigate that other people may not have. But clearly he was highly affected by his journey through the process that he had to go through. And he wrote, "I never wanted to sign the H-Boat's gagging order, and from the outset, I was only after the truth, justice, and reform." That's on page 399. And the truth, of course, will set you free, but the truth is not always itself free. I know that. From an organizational point of view with HBOS, I'll leave it very brief, because I think people can read up on that and listen to many of the interviews that Paul did over the years throughout his career, after in particular obviously becoming a whistleblower. But in essence, as you know, there was an culture indifferent to stakeholders, growth strategy at all cost, cultural indisposition to challenge, groupthink, compliant behavior, misdirected policies and procedures, lack of real transparency and accountability, and a culture denial and obfuscation. And I think Paul, given his forensic mind, he was a highly, highly intelligent man. He had the ability, clearly, to communicate what needed to be done. And it's, of course, part of his legacy now that we have this historical evidence that what Paul achieved through his speaking out and through his awareness and real insight and technical knowledge about what was going on, that we probably put a significant kink in the system as it was, or he did. And I think we all benefit from that today, but it's important in terms of legacy now to move, as Andy was saying, this on into what we can call some form of fellowship, but with a view to sharing experience, strength, and hope in these kind of environments, to provide real support, hope, and courage to people who have had financial misdemeanors done to them. And I think it's important to highlight that, obviously from a victim's point of view, financial fraud not only causes things like anxiety and depression and so forth, but it's a whole area around trust that has to be somehow recovered. We're not talking about recovery now in a full sense, but at least getting right with the world somehow again after such a devastating event. Whistleblowing is a little bit particular, but of course, it's only particular in the sense that at the same time of all the stress and distress and loss of trust, you also then lose your workplace relationship. You can become isolated, and you then have to navigate the truth somehow. And Paul was obviously very skilled at doing that. And I think what this fellowship is trying to do also is to provide a forum, a place where people can meet and talk and share this experience, strength, and hope. And I think with that, I'll just want to introduce Maureen into the conversation, because I think Maureen, Paul's wife, who we've known for many years as well, obviously, wonderful, wonderful woman and wife to Paul. And I just wanted to sort of ask you maybe first, unless you have other things you want to say, but what was it really, around Paul and his legacy? What was the impact on the family, and how did you fare in that whole process? Because the family is an oft forgotten victim as well. It's a sort of second stage post-traumatic stress, but at the same time, it's a victimization through, in this case, the whistleblower. I just want to see if you're willing to share that, but feel free to speak about anything you want. But would be great to hear your experience, strength, and hope for all concerned. Thank you.
Right. Hi, everyone. Thank you first of all, for inviting me. Thank you, Andy, for your wonderful words, and Robert as well for always being there. Got a big challenge, continues, doesn't it? It hasn't ended, and it's difficult to know where to begin. I will try to. I can go in all sorts of different tangents. So one of the things that Paul used to say is that opposite attracts. So he was a very good communicator, and that is something that I can only try to replicate. And he's left that the importance of communicating and sharing as a very important part of our family life. So when it all happened, obviously it was very shocking. It was shocking the way that he lost his job. It was shocking when he did whistleblow. It was shocking to find ourselves in that public eye, something that was quite private becoming so opened out there, and how it impacted the family was huge. It was tremendous. What can I say? As Robert says, Paul was always very honest, very open, very forensic. These were all his characters, his strengths. Very good communicator. Always, if he wanted to find something out, his forensic skills really came through, and which made him a very good professional in his capacity as being a professional. Was very much based on trying to find the truth, trying to find answers, and I believe that was one of his core values. I think that sometimes that took him in places that were dark. It was dark. It was confusing for him. But he came from a background of a family that always spoke and were very open with each other. Sometimes quite verbal in the ways that they express themselves, but the core was always with truth and wanting to be able to be heard and listened to, and moving on from there, accepting each other, with their different characters within the family. And there was a lot of pain also that came with that, because like everything, life is a journey, isn't it? And finding truth sometimes can be very painful. And we are human beings; we make mistakes, and that's part of the journey that shapes our characters. So, but when you have a core that is solid, when it's a foundational core, then that is in a way what attracted me to Paul in the first place. He really has always wanted the best for people. He was always positive about people. He would want people's skills to come through. He would want to help people develop, and sometimes in that, being so open and honest about what he believed were ways of achieving personal development might have intimidated a lot of people. It can be very intimidating when you hear the truth so openly, and people will hesitate to believe that that's what you really are trying to achieve. You know, that honesty is difficult sometimes to take. So living through the whistleblowing period was extremely hard. It was hard to see his whole career crash. He was so dedicated, and yeah, traumatic. It was very traumatic. He was always very passionate, so I think that to see someone who truly believed in professional entities become so corrupt, and he couldn't understand that. I think he found it very, very difficult to see through, and maybe he was a little bit naive. I always said to him, Paul, you know, human beings will have their interest in heart sometimes, and not that they want to, but they fall into that system, and greed became a clear yeah. I think that when he realized that it's all about greed, he started wanting to deepen his understanding of how this has an impact on society as a whole, how it can be so misleading, and I think that even that took him to reflect on his journey and how the gagging order affected him so badly, because it really went against what he really wanted to do, which was to be honest, and he wanted people to be accountable, and so it, you know, that was a big demon in those days, because the gagging order really went against what he was truly about, and it really ate into his spirit, affected his health, his mental health, belief in himself. And I can remember sitting down with Paul when with the beginning of the banking crisis, and we were just sitting down having breakfast with a very dear friend of ours who also now rests in peace, from a religious order, and we were just talking about the disaster that was inevitably coming, Paul was quite prophetic in his ways. He had such an insight of his, he knew his business. He knew what was going on in the financial services. And he could see it a couple of years ahead, really. And so in that morning when he decided to do something about it, we all encouraged him, because we all knew that you have to be true to yourself, and you have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I've done the best I can now. I've tried to make people accountable for their mistakes, and he never wished disaster or anything wrong. He just wanted people to acknowledge mistakes and make corrections. That's what he was always after. And so he decided to speak up, and that was the beginning of, I think, the most important part of his healing, really. He knew he had to be courageous, that nobody else had the opportunity like he was having at that moment in time. He had to take that step. And it changed his life, really. He had to let go of a lot of his friends, and who really weren't true friends. Again, we know that that's what happens. He then realized the importance of relationships, and building relationships, and still build those relationships with honesty and with integrity, seeking the benefit of everyone, not wanting to put that. He understood that a lot of people were going to be risk averse, because being connected to him would have meant financial disasters for them. So, but he did feel sadness that he lost a lot of his friends because of that, really. And as a family, well, it had a huge impact. I was fully focused on supporting him and encouraging him. Seeing him go through the hardships and building him up when he was very low. Affirming that what he was about, about who he truly was, is an important part of, I think, any, relationship, any family, and certainly a partner. So, so that was my focus, was trying to keep him floating above water, really, before he really sank. And it was very hard. And I'm human, so I was also inside. I was full of anxiety and worry for him. My son Oliver, which I might play a little recording that I received from him when I was asking, how was it for you? How all this time on with Paul not being around, how was it for you? And he sent me a little audio, which I might play it so that you can sort of hear from himself. But what really touched me was the fact that he said, yeah, you were so focused on him that sometimes I actually, even myself, forgot to look at how they were managing, because they had to deal with their anxieties and the word going around school, and people talking to him and talking to all of them, really, about Paul being on the news. And you know, just being thrown there in the limelight of things. It was hard for them. It affected them. The good thing is that I think that it's made us all better people. It has strengthened us in characters, not without suffering, especially mental health has been a consequence of it. And we still struggle with a couple of mental health issues in the family. But faith has been the key to our lives, and faith was what made us go through the most difficult period with Paul as well. And he was surrounded by wonderful people with strong faith, and I think that brings the values that are certainly highlighted in Paul's actions, really. So let me see if I can find a little note, which I'll just play the beginning of it. I hope you can hear it. I don't know if have you been hearing me? Okay, actually, my technology is not.
We've been hearing you very loud and very clear, Maureen. Not only what you've been saying, but also the authenticity with which you speak. It's clearly a family trait. Honesty is clearly a family trait, Maureen. Thank you. Carry on.
So let me see if it's
And obviously the media being outside our door. So that's a very physical, tangible impact on the day-to-day. And you do all that under the pretense or the idea that it will have some kind of greater impact. Now, Dad's example of whistleblowing really was a massive potential for a huge impact. And I guess you have to ask yourself if really it did have an impact on the greater world. Well, it's provided another case study for it, for study. And actually, the original act of whistleblowing did Dad a lot of harm. It was only afterwards, that when he sort of, in a way, whistleblew again, that it started to have an impact. And it was only because he was granted protections and all the damage had already been done. So the original act of whistleblowing in a way, only partially was positive for Dad and his, I guess, conscience. But the amount of turmoil that put him personally through was huge. As for whether or not, you know, it impacted us personally as a family, I mean, yeah, hugely. Not the least of which was because it lost Dad his job and created an enormous amount of pressure on the family, and sadness at home, and distracted the family in many ways. I mean, like, thinking about how that impacted Emily's mental health on a long-term basis, or yours, Mum. Thinking about, you know, how you had to focus a lot of your energy on retraining. You went back to school to try and help, but also for yourself. And you paid a lot of your emotional attention to Dad, which might have meant you were missing things going on at home or at school for us kids, namely me. So yeah, there was definitely some impacts from that at the time, caused by Dad losing his job and the emotional turmoil of it all. Then you got the second bout of whistleblowing, and obviously huge amount of media attention and what that meant for us reputationally at school as kids. But it felt good for us as a family. It felt positive. It felt like some kind of, in a way, closure. Long term down the line, I think it's impacted my personality quite a lot. I think I hold a lot of space in my life for honesty and integrity and values around speaking truth and justice to power. But I always related to that because I was always anti-authoritarian. Daniel took it in probably a much better way. He's much more clever and quite political about how he engages, but he still has very good values about honesty and integrity.
That was part of the conversations which I got his permission to share. Because that's how we are. That's how we communicate. That's how we share. Sometimes listening to things can be quite difficult. But being made vulnerable also has its place, and we don't talk about that enough sometimes, how vulnerable we can be as human beings and how important it is to share our vulnerabilities, really. From my daughter's perspective, she's strong. She's got strong values. Her faith is very, very important to her life, and from her perspective, she would say that it's one of the legacies is that to do sometimes things that are difficult, it means that you have to be sacrificial, and that comes with suffering. And the understanding of being sacrificial has to be based on willing the good of others before oneself. And that has huge weight on us as human beings. It affected her mental health, of course, because it's a very lonely place to be. When you want to stand up for your beliefs and your values, when you don't want to be pushed around or forced to do things that go against your principles and your values. And we do live in a society that seems to encourage, I guess, shutting people down when they want to share something that is different, something that is important to them. Freedom, you know, being able to speak freely and not feel intimidated is very difficult. And I think that it's not only in the financial services, it's certainly in the health profession and the healthcare profession. If you stand up for your values and things, you know, they try to pigeonhole you into one way or another. So it has been crushing, but at the same time, it's given us courage to want to speak up and to take that risk of trying to do the best that we can in society, really. I don't know if there's anything that anyone wants to ask, really, but there is you know, the reality is that as a family, you know, first of all, we are human beings, and we're certainly not perfect, but you know, love means that you have to bear with all aspects of life, and bear it with patience and with courage, giving time and space to be able to process the traumas and the experiences that we have has been part of the journey as well. Giving space and time, and something like this obviously allows that to happen as well. Communication, and then space and time to reflect and take action, hopefully.
Maureen, the the way in which you have calmly communicated your thoughts and feelings and experiences of a family, and the bravery in which you've spoken, and the willingness to share your son's comments as well, are all gifts and treasures and blessings. And we promise as a community, I promise now, I vow now, that I and we will continue to do all we can to help ensure that the sacrifices that were made by Paul, yourself, and the rest of the family will be turned into useful, helpful healing for others. And we vow to do that, Maureen. We vow to do that because that's where the energy is taking us. Ladies and gentlemen, can I please, before we pass back to Robert to pick up from there, and then for Robert to pass on to Steve Conley, can I please invite everybody to take a moment just to show our appreciation for Maureen and her family and for all that they have done. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very, very much indeed.
And thank you for carrying on, keeping on. It's important to keep on. And I encourage you all to continue building on this plight, really. It's such an important part. And my son Oliver at the end recognized that, he can be very cynical about certain things nowadays. If there's one thing that I could say is that Paul did have a sense of humor. Sometimes I didn't understand it, but he had a good sense of humor. And he would always say, what's important, what's in the inside or what's in the outside? And he would challenge us as a family, to try to get to that. What's important, things or experiences? And all these things that happen in our lives, these stories, are experiences that can shape us and must shape us. And hopefully he would say things that sometimes I found very abrupt, and he would say, is it better to be forgotten but not dead, or dead but not forgotten? And I just I used to get cross with him, said but yes, he always had that punchline at the end. And anyway, thank you very much for listening to me. I hope that everyone continues to support each other, and I am here. So if you ever want to have a catch up with me as well about certain things, I'm more than happy to support the movement,
Wonderful.
the fellowship.
It's wonderful, Maureen. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very, very much indeed. And in the spirit of what you just spoke about there, the idea of us supporting each other, Robert, could you please bring to life some of your thoughts, ideas, insights around the idea of people working together collaboratively to find truth and healing and fellowship? And then when you're ready, please pass over to Steve Conley to pick up from there. Thank you, Robert. Over to you.
Thanks, Andy. And let me first, of course, my heartfelt thanks to Maureen. Thank you very much for being here tonight. It was wonderful, wonderful to hear you. And thanks for sharing. And you're right. It's only through our vulnerability that we can also be authentic and truthful, and actually provide some real hope, which I think is what is it of the essence of the fellowship, which is kind of emerging out of the TTF, is this idea, of course, that everyone who's gone through what someone like Paul has gone through needs a supportive network, a fellowship, which can provide a framework and a forum for sharing thoughts, ideas, and experience, strength and hope, as one would call it. because only through that do we, for ourselves, start to see within our own context how we can navigate this tragedy, which is for many people devastating and very traumatic, and what sort of recovery is possible is only through working and being with people who fully understand and have been in similar situations and are on a similar but different journey in that. And I think Andy will maybe speak a bit more about that later on, how the TTF is then going to provide sort of as an umbrella organization the impetus for that. And if there's one thing that is also Paul's legacy, is really the impetus for us all to provide something of a fellowship for recovery from these type of traumas. But I will pass on to Steve, who will talk more about this, and then obviously on to other speakers. But thank you very much, Maureen.
Okay, so yeah, so I'm Steve Connolly. 14 years ago, I was head of investments at HSBC. I've previously been head of investments at RBS Group, Santander. I was the chair of the British Bankers Association Bank Assurance Steering Group through the Retail Distribution Review. And I didn't like the ethics, the integrity in the banks. So I quit. I took a 75% pay cut. And I can only think, you know, Maureen, when I listen to you, it's just so, I previously thought unfortunate, but perhaps fortunate that I didn't have a family around me at the time that devastating shift happened. I dedicated myself to delivering what I call the trusted advisor, or a structurally trustworthy system, and I've been doing that ever since. And I've been pretty unpopular in the industry. It was pretty evident actually last Thursday before I attended the APPG in Westminster. I was in the morning at the PFS conference at the Excel with 2,000 financial advisors around me, and I just felt like I was the exact opposite of everyone else around me, and I was lucky to get out, I think, alive in that situation, because they all know me a bit outspoken. An advocate for truth becoming visible. I've been working with Andy ever since, and more recently, we've been working together on life planning. So the business I run is the Academy of Life Planning, and out of that has come something called Get Safe, which is get support after financial exploitation. And what we found was that survivors, victims of financial exploitation have their lives devastated. It impacts not just them, but their families. And I thought, well, what can I do to support that? Initially, I thought it was, well, I can give them a life plan, because people in devastating circumstances lose inability to conceive a future and end up in depression. And giving a life plan would give a conception of a future that was better. And that was a great gift. We did a pilot, and that was successful. But I sensed that the main problem was that there was a conversation that was never going away and we've been working with individuals. There's about five or six people on this call now who we're working with, who've been fighting for justice for 14, 15, 16 years and unable to let it go, unable to start a life plan. You just can't until you get some sort of justice. The way I do the life plan and the justice planning is using AI, open AI. And if you've ever, I don't know if some of you, probably 90% of you have never tried it for this reason, but when you do, it's absolutely mind-blowing of what it can do to support victims of financial exploitation. It completely levels the playing field. It completely delivers what I call information symmetry. So you know as much as the bank. It shines a light in the darkest recesses of what's going on. Truth becomes visible. So that's what we've been doing. We've been using AI to shine the lights on these cases that are 16 years old. And we've achieved more in weeks and months than very capable people have achieved in 16 years. I've managed to move mountains and we're starting to make some real headway with this. So what we're doing is delivering life plans, which we call the Rebuild and Thrive program, and Citizen Investigator Playbook, I call it, which is the Goliathon project. You can see in the background, David versus Goliath, to level the playing field and give free to need, so it's all free, setting up as a charity, to help people tackle the system, to pursue justice. But also it does create this kind of fellowship as well. So when Andy introduced me to Robert, I talked about, well, we kind of have this sort of fellowship going at the moment in Get Safe, where we meet every week, and it's a very supportive group. We help one another through devastating circumstances, and we make some headway. It's a very practical, action-focused solution. We're trying to fix, through the Goliathon, we're trying to fix cases using AI. Sort of thing I just listed here, what sort of thing we do. We do metadata analysis, timeline reconstructions, version comparisons on evidence, logic checking. We identify inconsistencies in communications, translate technical jargon, write letters to the banks, to the regulators, to FOS. We write to MPs. I've even written to Buckingham Palace and I got reply, because AI is a fantastic communication tool. But its ability to read hundreds of pages in minutes. And what it does, the public can finally understand their own evidence for the first time ever. What humans miss, AI sees instantly. So that's what we've been doing. But what I wanted to talk about is the fellowship, and we're developing this with Robert and Andy to offer this supporting community free to need to people who need it and their families. I don't know, Andy, whether there's an opportunity, maybe one or two people who are present who have experienced the support from Get Safe might say a word or two just to say that how it, because they're the victim.
I'd be very happy with that, Steve, because without any doubt, what I have personally witnessed in relation to the impact of the work that yourself and Robert do and have been doing and are capable of doing is having a very positive effect on people's lives at a time when nothing else is having a positive effect on people's lives. And time again, I'm coming to the conclusion that there is a real void, a real empty space where there should be care and healing and support. And the work that yourself and Robert and others are doing is a deliberative, intentional attempt to fill that space, that empty void, with something good. I can see Lisa's put her hand up, but let's go to Lisa. I think Lisa might want to chip in here. Folks, we're going to be finishing at roughly 7:30, 7:45 tonight, something like that. After you've heard from Steve and a couple of other folks, including Lisa, we'll go to Dr. Ian Foxley, then we'll go to Simon, and then we'll start bringing our conversation to a close. Thank you, Steve. Lisa, over to you. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Andy. I just want to, I've got a few things to say. First of all, to Steve, who has given me support over the last, I think, 6-7 weeks recently. You know, it has been fantastic, and I thank him for that personally now. He has really helped me. His really kind words and support has meant a great deal to me. That's what I wanted to say. Also, tonight I've heard from Maureen, who spoke eloquently about Paul, who I met a couple of times at Parliament meetings, about family. So if it's all right with you, Andy, I just want to read something out, if that's okay, about family and the impact it has. Bear with me, everyone, please bear with me whilst I put my glasses on.
Take your time, Lisa. This is important stuff. This is what it's all about.
We have spoken about family, but I feel that the impact on families is never really addressed. So I was asked once by a journalist to put together something about what our family was like before the events that unfolded. So this is what I wrote. Before it all changed, we were a family like any other. Our family was strong, close-knit and loving. Myself, my husband Peter, and our 2 sons, Daniel and Hayden, shared everything. Birthdays and anniversaries were always marked with special dinners out. Just the 4 of us sitting round a table, enjoying each other's company and creating memories, whilst listening to Peter's funny anecdotes about passengers he had had in the back of his taxi. Being a London taxi cabbie meant there were plenty of anecdotes to tell Daniel and Hayden, who loved to hear them. Indeed, during one of our memorable trips to London, we went for a trip to the London Eye. As the wheel slowly turned, Peter pointed out all the historic buildings and their locations. As a small crowd gathered round to listen to him, Daniel and Hayden stood looking at their dad with such pride that my heart swelled with happiness. But it was Sundays that truly defined our rhythm as a family. Come rain or shine, we would head to a local county park, feeding ducks in the spring, spotting deer in the colder months, walking side by side and talking about everything and nothing, but always with a giggle in our voices. Sundays were sacred, our time to reconnect away from the noise of the world. We lived simply but securely. We worked hard, budgeted carefully, and managed our finances reasonably, responsibly. There was nothing extravagant about our lifestyle, but there was joy, peace, and a shared sense of trust in the future. We believed that our long-standing relationship with Halifax Lloyds Banking Group meant we were in safe hands, that they would act fairly and with integrity as they so often claimed in public. the beginning of the end. In October 2012, Peter began to experience profound fatigue. After repeated GP tests and inconclusive test results, he was eventually diagnosed with ME/CFS in December 2012. He was forced to stop working in January 2013. And before missing any mortgage payments, Peter did the responsible thing and called our mortgage lender, Halifax, to ask for help. Unfortunately, what he got was misinformation, confusion, and no help at all. He asked for a simple adjustment to the interest rate on our mortgage. It was a modest and reasonable request, made in good faith. But the person he spoke to was clearly untrained and unqualified. There was no proper advice, no support, and no solution. It was nothing more than the computer says no. That conversation marked the start of a nightmare that would unfold over the coming years. We were not just let down, we were actively harmed. The scene that haunts me. In March 2014, Peter was becoming worn down by illness, guilt, relentless financial pressure. He lost hope. That morning in March, when I left for work, he said nothing. No kiss goodbye, no talk later, just silence. Something was wrong. I returned home. I searched the house and finally looked in the garage. And there I saw my husband, the man I loved, the father of my sons, standing on a stool, tying a rope around a beam, preparing to take his life. I screamed. I talked him down. I called an ambulance. He was taken to hospital and assessed by mental health professionals. He was placed on high-dose antidepressants. He survived that day, but he was never the same. I live with that image every single day. It is the product of deliberate corporate failure. He was not suicidal because of his illness. He was suicidal because of system controlled by Halifax Lloyds Banking Group had made him feel worthless, hopeless, and abandoned. The barrage of threatening letters and calls never stopped. No matter how many times Peter requested lowering the interest rate on our mortgage, he was effectively told the computer says no. There were times when it felt like we were part of a scene from a Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, with Hedwig the owl continuously posting letters to us. Unfortunately, our letters were for repossession hearings and not for invites to join Hogwarts. On the 27th of July 2017, we attended a repossession hearing. Sadly, despite our best efforts to halt the repossession of our home, the judge granted the order. As we walked in silence back to our car, processing what had just happened and holding back tears. However, once we reached the safety of our car, neither of us could hold the tears back. These were not little tears. These were giant-sized tears that no single tissue could absorb. It was as we were driving home that I received a notification on my phone from Twitter. This notification alerted me to a small paragraph announcement from the Financial Conduct Authority that the FCA confirmed Lloyds failed to treat customers fairly, especially vulnerable ones. Staff were untrained and under-resourced. The bank's approach caused avoidable financial and emotional harm. They had fined Lloyds Bank Bank of Scotland, Halifax, and the mortgage business just over £64 million. How could that be? On the very day we potentially lost our home, the FCA announced a redress scheme for mortgage borrowers let down by the UK's largest mortgage lender. They knew that announcement was coming out on that very day, and yet they still were pursuing us for our home. At the time, we believed this was just poor service, a painful failure unique to us. It was only later that we discovered Peter had, in fact, been a victim of a systemic abuse that affected thousands of families between April 2011 and December 2015. And Halifax Lloyds Banking Group denied that they had done anything wrong. We were victims of a national scandal. In June 2020, the Financial Conduct Authority published their final notice into the failure of Lloyds Bank, Bank of Scotland, Halifax, and the mortgage business for mistreating mortgage borrowers in repayment difficulties. This covered the precise period during which we sought help and were instead met with silence, penalties, pressure, and repossession. As I started to read aloud the final notice to Peter, he said, "Stop. I can't take any more." We hugged each other. We put our foreheads together and just sobbed and sobbed until our t-shirts were soaked through. We couldn't talk. We couldn't catch a breath. The tears would not let us. In October 2020, Peter unexpectedly passed away. He was 62. The emotional and physical stress of those years took an irreversible toll on his body. While the medical cause was cardiac, the reality is more complex. The system that was supposed to help us slowly destroyed the man I loved. Thank you.
Lisa,
Yes, Andy.
are the boys at home tonight?
Yeah, they are.
Lisa, thank you. Thank you. What you've just set out over the last 10 minutes or so perfectly explains what we need to do, why we're trying to do what we're trying to do, and gives us wonderful clues about how to go about doing it, Lisa. Like your lived experience and Maureen's, and unfortunately many others, we have to find a way to provide the support to heal those who have been harmed. I wrote down what you said, Lisa. You said people in devastated, sorry, you said people were not just letting you down, they were actively harming you. I believe that to be true. I believe the system can be so ruthless. It's almost as if the system sometimes takes pleasure in using its power against those who are vulnerable. Thank you, Lisa. I'm going to invite Steve Conley to come back to the conversation later. What we're going to do now, Lisa and Steve and Robert and Maureen, if that's okay, is go to Dr. Ian Foxley. Then we're going to hear from Simon Andres, and then we're going to come back to Steve to hear how Steve is sort of envisioning the workings of the ideas that we are sharing tonight. Thank you, Lisa. Dr. Ian Foxley, please take a moment to introduce yourself. I want people to understand the kind of circumstances that brought you into Paul Moore, rest in peace, as well. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Andy. Good evening, everyone. Actually, I'm going to start by saying thank you to Lisa. for explaining most graphically and emotionally the real effects of wrongdoing and financial wrongdoing and the ruthlessness of some large organizations in mistreating the individual. You're just a bank account and a profit margin to them, and they don't see the real effect it has upon the family. So thank you for sharing that to us. My own background is I'm an ex-military officer. I went into commercial telecommunications and ended up running a £2 billion program, a government contract in Saudi Arabia, and I got asked to sign off the corrupt money to the Saudi royal family and the generals, and I wouldn't do it, and I blew the whistle. And that was in 2010. It's taken me 15 years to almost get the real principals, who are the British government and Airbus, into a court. Airbus were caught out with another 6 contracts which were corrupt, totaling 22 billion euros and 22 billion euros in corrupt money, and paid a fine of 36 billion to the DOJ, PNF in France, and the SFO. The company I blew the whistle on was fined 30 million in 2019, so it took 19 years to get them into court, and the MD was eventually jailed for corruption as well. I'm still fighting, and we go to court in March next year to accuse the Airbus and the British government of complicity to corruption. And then once we've done that, we will have held them all accountable. And that's really what we seek to do. It's not, I didn't do it for the money. I did it to make things right and for justice. And that is something you'll hear a lot from whistleblowers all over the place. They don't do it for the money. It's about values. It's about bringing the truth to the foreground so that the public understand what's really going on. I want to touch on first, I've got 3 points to make, if you don't mind. And Maureen, hello again. I haven't seen you for over a year now. I met Paul in, I think, around 2011, when I was in the depths of depression, and I got introduced to him locally because we both are Catholic and we both went to Mass at Ampleforth Abbey. And someone pointed out Paul as the other major whistleblower who lived in North Yorkshire. And that began a firm friendship where we supported one another, and Paul was great. He used to take 2 bicycles up onto Farnby Moor, and we go for a cycle up on the moors. There's a bench up there, and he'd pull out a pipe and a flask of coffee, and we just sit and chat quietly about what we could do and how we could change the world by fighting for better protection and support for whistleblowers. The first point I want to make is the effects of blowing the whistle. There are 4 effects, and I list them as home, health, work, and wealth. But actually, they happen in a slightly different order. The first is your work, and as Maureen explained with Paul, you lose your job. You lose your job because the organisation cannot stand to hear the truth or have an individual from within the organisation speak the truth in public. And the effect of that is that it affects your current job and your subsequent loss of income, but it also affects your future prospects of employment as well. So it's not just a near-term effect, it's a medium and long-term effect as well. Other companies won't employ you because they're scared of you. They're scared of what you might do if you come across wrongdoing in their organization. And they're also scared on 2 levels. Firstly, on the reputation of the organization and the effect that your truth will have upon that. And secondly, upon the personal reputation of the directors and senior managers. If they knew, then they're complicit. And if they didn't know, they're negligent or incompetent. So it's which one do you want to choose? It's normally because they're complicit. They know about it, but they've turned a blind eye to it. And your truth hurts them greatly. The second effect is on your wealth, certainly on your immediate income, but secondly, also upon your future earnings and your ability to sustain and look after your family. And the third effect is upon your savings, because most of us, having been in senior positions in management or procurement, do have savings, but those are worn down as you cannot maintain your income, but your expenditure continues and is then exacerbated by the additional expenditure on legal fees to fight the organization because they don't go down willingly. And the cost of lawyers is frankly exorbitant. And then it's drawn out by a long tactic by the organization to delay things and drag it out and take you down legal loopholes to actually wear you down and drain your money. The third major effect is upon your health, your mental, your physical, and your spiritual health. And Paul and I also found that it's your values that you hold true to and your faith that gives you sustenance, and that's what keeps you effectively on the planet. Your belief in God and justice and truth is what holds you firm. And there are three things I think that Paul had. I call them the three F's. Don't get scared, none of them's rude. And the first one is fearlessness. He feared only God. There's a statement by Bernard de Clairvaux, who's a 13th century Cistercian monk, which was, fear only God, notice all things, change some things, and cherish the brethren. And in that last group of cherish the brethren, I look at this community and those of us who've been through it, who sustain one another. And I love the idea of the fellowship that Stephen and Robert have put forward. It really is a fellowship of those who are fighting for truth and justice. And the second one is faith. So fearlessness, faith. And the last one is fortitude. You've got to display fortitude on a daily basis. And Paul started in 2008 and unfortunately was cut short in 2020. But that's 17 years, 17 years of constantly fighting actually to have his voice heard and to fight for others. This idea of the new Wilberforce movement, don't give up. It took 150 years to actually abolish slavery. But you've got to start and you just got to keep going until you actually nail the bastards down, which we'll do next year. And the last one is home, health, work, wealth. The last one is home. These four are the four handholds that keep you on the rock face of life. You can take off 1, 2, 3, but if you take off fourth, you're in free fall. And I want to applaud Maureen and Daniel and Oliver and Emily, who actually were the big, safety line that kept Paul on the rock face of life. He loved them dearly, and we used to sit up on the doors and chat about you all and what we're doing. And it reflects, my own family of Emma and Freddie and Jessica and Nicholas are three, who are, we're a direct parallel. But I'm also as lucky as Paul. I have a wife who has stood by me and supported me fantastically. And if anyone deserves a medal at the end of this, it's her, not me, because I couldn't do it without her. You have to have that last bit of home refuge that understands you, knows you, understands your values and why you had to do what you did. Let me turn then from those are the effects to, if that's what happens to you, how do we overcome it? And where do we take it for the future? Which was part of the reflection on possibilities that Andrew mentioned at the very beginning here. And I want to say that the first thing is that we need protection. We need to show people that if you do stand up and speak up, you are going to be protected. And that's not the case at the moment. The papers are full of the nurses and doctors or the social workers who speak up about, sexual grooming and abuse around the country, or the clergy. The clergy are not clean in this. And the organization that protects them and doesn't hold them to account within their own organizations are wrong in so doing. And we have to speak out about it, no matter what sector the wrongdoing occurs in. But to do the protection, we need to persuade the politicians and the policymakers who provide the information to them and the policies that they might implement. And I have this one question which comes back to me time and time again. I've been at this for 15 years, and Paul started in 2 years before me. Why do politicians still resist the change in whistleblowing reform, whistleblowing legislative reform? That's what we have to get to the heart of. And it's cross-party. You know, we've had conservative governments for 14 years. We've had this current zombie government for the last year, who still have not changed anything for the greater good. And that's what we've got to keep battling for. The other thing we have to change is it's not just about legal change, it's about cultural change. We have to change the idea in giant organizations, public and private, that whistleblowers are not in it for the money. They're not there as traitors and snitches. They're there to do good for the organization and good for society. And I want to draw the analogy between the armed services covenant, and I would say that I'm an ex-army officer, with civil life, the civil sector, and those who are the courageous fighters within the civil sectors. You know, we the whistleblowers are at the front of it, but we have a big support of people who do good behind us. But the Armed Forces Covenant recognizes the moral obligation of the government to those who sacrifice their lives for the good of the country. And I think in the civil sector, there is a clear parallel to whistleblowers who are the conscience of society, and a moral obligation by the government to support those who actually sacrifice their careers and sometimes their lives for the good of society. And to that end, I suggest that we should set up therapeutic counselling to do that immediate catch, to look after people and their families who suffer with the loss of their job and their self-esteem and everything that goes with it. And secondly, interim financial support, because you have that immediate worry that Lisa and Peter felt of how the hell am I going to pay the mortgage? How am I going to look after the children? How am I going to feed my family and look after them? So you need interim financial support until you get back on your feet. You also need legal support, because you as an individual cannot fight the resource and the connections and the legal power that can be affected by a large organization, and is affected. You know, I've been fighting lawyers now for 15 years. Third thing you need is you need vocational rehabilitation. You need to be put back into the workforce. And to do that, you need someone who understands and supports whistleblowers and has the connections to go back into large organizations and say, here's a good person. Have you got a job? Are you an organization who actually supports whistleblowers? Let's give them a badge. Let's give them a public tick that actually says we support whistleblowers. And let's question big organizations who don't sign up and say, why don't you support whistleblowers? What's wrong with your culture? What's wrong with your way of thinking that you don't want to support people who speak the truth in your organization? And therefore, why aren't you employing whistleblowers? And in the longer term, we need training, we need education, and we need more research into what whistleblowing is, how it can be affected better, and what obstacles there are remaining to actually stop people from speaking up. I did my thesis, my PhD thesis, on the root causes of whistleblowing. The first one is fear for your home, health, your work, and your wealth. And the second one is futility. You know, this idea that I'm going to be ineffective. Well, what causes that, and how do we get to the bottom of that, and how do we rectify it? And the last one is we need active marketing and advocacy to go into big organizations and talk about why whistleblowing is a good thing. If you take this idea of, you know, why wouldn't you want to do it? Why wouldn't you want your employees to speak up? And if you do, then what processes have you got to respond to them effectively? And create, if necessary by statutory order, a responsibility for the organization to respond effectively, not only to the whistleblower, but also the concerns that they raise. And they have to properly and positively address them. So there's my 6-point plan.
Thank you.
I call it the covenant. I think I was always very envious of one thing, Maureen. I'll tell you this now. In the back of Paul's book on the fly sheet, and I have my copy that he signed for me, there's a whistle. There is the whistle that got sent to Paul anonymously. And if you ever want to sell it, Maureen, I'm going to put a first option on buying it off you, please. Because engraved on that is something that I think we ought to hold dear. And it's a kind of the whistleblower paradox. You know, Paul puts on the last page of his book, it's funny how everyone considers honesty a virtue, yet no one wants to hear the truth. And it's true, it's the whistleblower paradox. We want you to speak up, but we'll kill you when you do. And on this whistle that Paul has, somebody had engraved, Dulce et decorum est pro patria testari, which means it is a sweet and proper thing to speak up for your country. And it's a take on Wilfred Owen's poem, Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori, which actually was written by Horace in 23 BC, by the way. Just showing off my classical education here. But it's wonderful. And Maureen, I don't know if you ever want to keep it, but I'm going to say, can I have it, please? I'm quite happy to buy it off you because I will blow it, you know, when we win, because we need to blow the whistle publicly. And that's the one whistle I envy.
Wonderful.
Thank you, everybody.
Wonderful, 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 Ian. Thank you very, very much, sir. Thank you. We said at the beginning we didn't really know where the energy is going to take us tonight, and we're letting it take us where it's taken us, and I'm really pleased with where it is taking us. Ian has set out another layer of practical, supportive mechanisms that could and should be part of the fellowship concept we are building tonight. This is wonderful. This is special. This really is wonderful and special. One of the issues is that sometimes people think of whistleblowing as a thing that relates to what's happened in the distant past. And there's sometimes almost an inference that that kind of stuff doesn't happen anymore. We've asked Simon Andres to spend, literally, Simon, please, just a couple of minutes giving us a kind of helicopter view around his life experience. The important thing being, it's about his very recent life experience. And what this tells us, ladies and gentlemen, as you're about to hear, is that the kind of challenge that Mr. Paul Moore, rest in peace, had to endure is the kind of challenge that others are still having to deal with today. Simon Andres, can you please spend a few moments, a few minutes, sharing with us your world experience and why tonight's session matters as much as it does for you? Thank you, Simon.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Yep, thanks to everyone who shared. Maureen, just a privilege to listen to you, and just deep respect for what you've been through. I completely identify, and thanks to Lisa and Ian. What that the plan that you've suggested, this is it's totally my experience. I mean, just briefly give you an introduction of what's in the financial markets. 35 years. I was working for a large Wall Street firm in New York. Like you, I was forced. They tried to force me to sign off as a senior signatory and senior managing director on fraud. And wanted me to be the fall guy, and I refused. They retaliated. I had a heart attack at the desk. They didn't call an ambulance. I nearly died on the pavement. And when I came back to work, I started to uncover more and more fraud, refused to collude, and more in the values that you shared about Paul. For me, I've always stood up to bullies, abusers, stood up for the truth. I pride myself on integrity and building a workplace where, as a senior manager, I brought the best out in people. They committed some horrendous acts of retaliation, which resulted in multiple hospitalizations. And then they terminated me. They tried to set me up with sham doctors to write false reports about me. And then I entered the world of regulatory reporting, which was, I guess this was one of the most devastating parts, is because I believed that the regulators who were there to police the market were wanting to protect me as a whistleblower, but it was quite the opposite. They wanted to protect the company. The FCA, I pleaded with the FCA for protection. They did nothing to intervene. My regulatory reporting resulted in a US regulator, the CFTC, sanctioning the firm. The FCA only took some action after that sanction. But for the most part, what the financial crime and the abuse of their employees, not a single regulator has ever taken action for those crimes, and I'm still with it in that fight. And we've got still a few minutes, yeah. One thing I just touch on, right? I developed an acute trauma condition. I'm a trauma survivor. I wish there had been a support system available to me when I became a whistleblower, but there was not. It devastated my family. Yeah. Every time I became dysregulated, there was another act of retaliation. I thought I was going to have another heart attack, which then meant I was in the emergency. I was in the emergency probably 9 times. But I'm a courageous person, like many of the other whistleblowers I've encountered and the people who have spoken tonight. One of the reasons they came forward was because I am a courageous person, and the company I reported have underestimated me. So because I was able to rebuild my life. One thing you mentioned, Ian and Maureen, was faith. It's faith that's kept me going. I've learned that as a whistleblower, the pursuit of justice and the truth has to be done without putting revenge in my heart, because that's what poisoned me. It poisoned me, and I tried to protect my family, but what I ended up doing was hurting them, and it devastated us. And it's only when I've been able to approach the whistleblowing in a different way, which is in the pursuit, is why I started in the first place, pursuit of justice instead of revenge and hatred, is when things have started to change for me. And I've met some amazing people. Andy, you've done an incredible job. Bringing people together. You're the first person who's held a group which I feel genuine support and camaraderie with other whistleblowers who are all supporting each other. And it's only through groups like this and the work that you do through unity and standing up and having a voice and helping other whistleblowers is how things are going to change. And the whole regulatory system needs a massive overhaul, and whistleblower protection is an absolute priority. The FCA encourages, they force people, regulated people, to come forward, and if they don't, under their senior manager and responsibility program, if you don't come forward, they're threatening you with personal accountability. Yet when you do come forward, they do nothing to protect you. It's an absolute outrage. We need a regulator that's fit for purpose. But I'm here. I'm doing really well. I've been in trauma recovery. I've learned how to deal with that. I'm really hoping to get involved in other groups and help people with trauma, because it's when you can get into a stable place, it's when people listen to you. I was so dysregulated that people couldn't hear me because it was it was difficult for them to understand what I was going through. It was just see me suffering and overwhelmed. But yeah, we need support groups. Absolutely, what Ian said is, that was an incredible initiative. What you're suggesting, I wholly support that, and I'm really happy to get involved. But just much thanks to everyone. This is an amazing evening.
Thank you, Simon. I think you're right. I think this is an amazing evening, and it's an amazing evening because people are feeling safe enough to open up their hearts and show and share what's inside it. And that's power.
Yeah.
What can stop that? What can stop that? What can stop the willingness to share and expose ourselves to the risks associated with vulnerability? What I propose we do, folks, is this. I'll go back to Robert for any final comments from Robert. We'll then go to Steve for any final comments from Steve. We'll then go to Maureen for some final comments from Maureen. And then I'll bring the conversation for now to a close. And those two words are very important for now. I think what we've done tonight is we've picked up the ball and we've run with it. And I think we can carry on running with it. And we can put in place mechanisms to meet and converse and explore how to bring the concepts we're touching on tonight to life. And that's where the energy is taking me. And there's no doubt in my mind, folks, we are going in the right bloody direction, willingly, intentionally. Mr. Robert Downer, any final comments from yourself, sir?
No, nothing more, Andy, than just to say a profound, sincere thank you for every person who shared this evening. I mean, it's been as you say, it's been a journey for all of us, last hour and a half. I'm so grateful. I'm so thankful for this time with us all. So I'll just pass it on to the next person, but thank you all.
Robert, thank you. Thank you for everything and for the many things you do to help us stay afloat and survive this journey we're on. Thank you, Robert. Mr. Steve Conley.
Thank you, Andy. So I've shared something in the chat, which is a link to a fellowship for Get Safe, the support after financial exploitation group, where we help people combat the Goliath. It'd be the Goliath and the David taking on the system. I do believe OpenAI gives us the tools to succeed in months where it's previously taken years. And people find the community very supportive as well. So I know the guys on here from the group, they've fed back to me that they found it absolute blessing. Is that, yeah, thanks for that. So yeah, I don't want to keep it short, Andy, for you. So I'll pass on now to the next speaker, if that's okay.
Thank you very much indeed. Robert and Steve and Ian and Simon and others, with your permission, what we'll do is we'll organise another one of these in the not too distant future so that we can carry on running with the ball that we've now wholeheartedly picked up. I know there's other content we could have shared tonight, but it makes sense to come back to that other content and the other more concrete ideas we've developed in due course. Maureen, what have you started? What have you and your family started? Maureen, back to you. Any final comments?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I'm here, available to speak to people, share more deeply. Be more than happy to do so. So happy for my contact to be shared with you. And basically, my daughter said something when I was talking to her about, painfully reliving those moments we went through. She said, but whistleblowing, really, it's a call to battle, to speak up. And it feels like Paul sadly left us. There should have been another book, another something else needed to happen, waiting for something else. And it was like Gondor, still waiting for Rowan to answer. You know, that there's a need to bring people together, to be courageous, to speak up, to not be intimidated. Yes, it creates a huge amount of anxieties and fear, and they try to squash the truth, squash people being able to speak up. But if there is the support group there available, it is absolutely imperative that that is given to those who want to continue the whistleblowing. So professional support, of course, is essential. And Oliver also said something to me that, you know, he did recognize that, you know, he feels a little bit cynical because he had an experience himself at university where he was encountering a situation in which he spoke up, and he realized very quickly, because of his father's experience, that it wasn't going to get him anywhere. And in fact, they tried to intimidate him, squash him, the usual thing, reduce. It goes against the dignity of the human being, really. And that attitude, that the boards have, or people of in position of power or in position of authority have, it needs to change. And education is absolutely key for this. That is a big challenge for the system, really. We need to bring it from, you know, from core foundational aspect, to be able to be honorable and yes, honor, bring back honor, bring back the dignity of listening to others' points of view, even if there isn't everything done correctly or right. It's the intention of doing the right thing that really needs to be highlighted. So, Simon, thank you for sharing, and I'm here.
Thank you, Maureen. Thank you, Maureen.
Also,
Andy,
to
can I just
Lisa.
say that on the Parhesia website, there are a number of podcasts of whistleblowers who talk about their experience in discussion with normally an academic with experience in or a lawyer in their area. So if you want to hear those and learn about the lived experience, they're all on the Parhesia website.
Thank you, Ian. I've watched them all. Every single one of them is very, very powerful and thought-provoking and frankly very motivating. I highly recommend everybody does take time to check out the Parhesia website. I put a link in the chat earlier. The chat notes will be circulated, so through that you'll get to the bit. Go to the top right hand of the Parhesia website and you'll see a drop down where you'll get to the videos and the podcasts. Thank you, Ian. Thank you. Now, Ian, unfortunately, this is not the whistle. This is not the whistle, but this is a whistle. In fact, it's one of two whistles given to me by Mr. Robert Delner about a year or so ago. Do you remember, Robert? And what I'm going to do, I'm going to blow it. I'm then going to read something out from Paul's book, and then I'm going to blow it again, and then we're going to call the proceedings to a close for tonight. So here goes, folks. Here's a whistle blow. This is a part of Paul's book where he talks about the movement that he wanted to create. We all know that things didn't work out in a way that would enable Paul to create what he wanted to create. But we, ladies and gentlemen, together can create the thing that Paul envisioned, this movement. On page 556 of the book, Paul articulates these thoughts beautifully. He's talking about what he described as the Wilberforce movement. We can call it whatever we want to call it. We can call it the fellowship. We can call it whatever we want to call it. We can call it the covenant. We can call it whatever we want to call it. This is what Paul Moore wrote. There will obviously be a lot to do. Like William Wilberforce, we will be up against virtually the entire establishment of vested interest. The corporatocrats, the greedocrats, and the elitocrats won't like it, but some things like love, truth, justice, and freedom are worth fighting for. To get this done once and for all, we are all going to need to work together, cooperate together, everyone together. That way we can connect with millions, share our experience, strength, and hope, and build a better world together. I'm going to now refer to a quotation that I often refer to that is absolutely sympathetico in keeping with the words I just read out from Paul Moore. It's from the 1960s. It's Robert F. Kennedy. He said, "Every time we turn our heads the other way, when we see the law flouted, when we tolerate what we know to be wrong, when we close our eyes and ears to the corrupt because we are too busy or too frightened, when we fail to speak up and speak out, we strike a blow against freedom and decency and justice." Mr. Paul Moore, if you're listening, and your beloved family, thank you very much indeed. And on that note, we'll blow the whistle once again and we'll end tonight's conversation, folks. Thank you all very, very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you. Good night all. Good night all.